The title is a bit of a spoiler, but it's true. I really don't know how to feel about this laptop. I went into this review thinking that it's probably another one of Illegear's machines which aren't perfect. They've got some flaws for sure, but you know, they're still good laptops all the same, right? This one is a little bit different though. This one has flaws that are difficult for me to overlook. This is the Illegear Onyx V TGL. I'm gonna start first with what I like about this machine, and as usual, it starts with the specs. It's got an Intel Core i7-11800H, which is a Tiger Lake H45 processor with 8 cores and 16 threads, and is built on Intel's 10nm SuperFin. There's an Nvidia RTX 3050 inside here together with the standard Intel UHD graphics, and this particular unit that I'm reviewing has a totally overkill 32GB of Samsung DDR4 3200 memory. For storage, a 512GB Samsung PM9A1 PCIe 4.0 NVMe SSD, and for connectivity, an Intel AX201 Wi-Fi 6 chip and a 2.5GB Ethernet jack, which is totally cool. There's a 15.6-inch 1080p 144Hz IPS display, and keeping it alive is a 62 Wh battery. The Onyx V TGL is pretty standard when it comes to size and weight at 1.98 kilograms, 359mm wide, 243mm deep, and 24mm at its thickest of the table, while the power brick weighs in at 560 grams, is made by FSP, and delivers 120 watts. The laptop is made from a mixture of plastic and black anodized aluminum, with pretty much the only plastic part being the bottom half of the chassis. The black anodized aluminum, while it feels quite good to the touch, however, is super prone to fingerprint and grime stains and dust, and as usual, you'll get a shiny Illegear logo on the lid. If there's one thing that I like about Illegear machines, it has got to be their I/O selection, and the Onyx V TGL is no different. On the right, a full-sized SD card slot, something I always love to see, 2 USB-A 3.05GB, and an exhaust vent. The left has more exhaust vents, a USB-A 2.0 port, and a headphone and microphone audio jack, and down the back, even more vents, your barrel charging port, a 2.5GB per second Ethernet port, a full-sized HDMI 2.1 port, and a USB-C 3.2 10GB port, which will instead be a Thunderbolt 4 port if you go for the RTX 3060 model. There's plenty of intake vents down on the bottom, 2 bottom firing speakers, and 11 screws holding the bottom in place. 2 fans and 5 heat pipes keep the 11800H and the RTX 3050 cool, and if you ever need to expand your system, you get 2 RAM slots, 2 NVMe M.2 slots, and well, if you ever feel like swapping out your Wi-Fi chip, you can too. Despite the display lid being pretty nice and sturdy, it unfortunately does not pass my one-handed opening test, and can I just say that the display not being perfectly aligned with the body trips my OCD a little? Yeah, the unit that I have seems to be, kind of rotated more towards the right, which is just no. The display itself looks pretty good, however, with pretty nice and vibrant colors, viewing angles that are expected of an IPS display, with a 144Hz refresh rate, though it doesn't get bright enough nor dim enough for my liking, which is a bit of a shame. The webcam is on the top bezel with a blue privacy light that comes on to let you know when it's in use. And I find that the webcam actually looks not too bad. I mean, for a 720p webcam, yes, there is a little bit of noise, but the colors, the dynamic range, everything, the sharpness in general actually looks pretty decent, and the audio quality is also not too bad. Like, it's surprising. Yes, there is a little bit of noise flaw, that kind of hissing, but if that really bothered you, you could always turn on, RTX voice or RTX broadcast, I think it's called, because there is of course the 3050 in here, and you could take advantage of that. Now, a good keyboard is pretty important for me in a laptop, and I'm happy to say that for the most part it has a good keyboard. But my main gripe with this machine isn't the typing experience, nor is it the deck flex on the keyboard area, but rather the deck flex on the touchpad / wrist rest area that was bad to the point that I could actuate the left and right clicks by pressing on the area beside the trackpad. And the problem with this is that I have actually managed to press on the touchpad accidentally before just by using the laptop normally with my wrists on that location, and that is a huge turnoff for me. Heck, it was even bad enough that just by resting the laptop on my body, I actually managed to accidentally press those buttons on the touchpad by pressing the front of the laptop and also the underneath of it. It also doesn't really help that this is probably the worst touchpad that I've used on an Illegear machine, not because it's not smooth or it has bad responsiveness, but there's just something fundamentally wrong with the left click such that it, actuating it almost feels like it has this two-step actuation. That just feels pretty disgusting. The weird thing is that I do not notice anything wrong with the right mouse button click, so I sincerely hope that this is just something wrong with the unit that I received, because this is just bad in my opinion, especially since I've reviewed Illegear's machines in the past, which have had pretty minimal deck flex, sure, but no trackpad issues. Before we step into the software side of things, I want to take a moment to talk about my experience with the laptop out of the box, because I feel that this is, the most transparent thing to do, right? Now, what I'm about to say may just be an issue with my unit and may not represent, this model as a whole, but out of the box, I was noticing very strange behavior. The first has to do with the apostrophe key, right? Where if I pressed it once, nothing would happen, the character would not appear, but the moment that I pressed it the second time, the apostrophe key would appear twice in my Word document or whatever, or whatever I'm typing on, right? So I couldn't figure out what was going on, and so I had to reformat the laptop. And then I had this very strange issue of system-wide display artifacting with what looked like weird pixel shifting, but luckily this only seemed to happen once and never happened again, probably due to some updated driver, maybe? Look, I'm just saying that out of the box the experience was far from flawless, and not everyone is as technical as I am with the knowledge to know how to, solve these kinds of issues. So yeah. Software as usual is pretty bare bones. You get your Realtek Audio, Sound Blaster, Cinema 6, Intel Graphics Center, and of course Illegear Command Center. If you saw my previous Illegear Arte video, then you know that this software has gotten quite a bit of a rework with a much more modern look and much more functionality now, with things like special battery charging modes and display color tweaking. But the thing that I find most interesting this time around is the Illegear G+ function that allows you to tune the running wattage of your CPU as well as undervolt it and even overclock the GPU. The Samsung PM9A1 Inside pulled a sequential read of 4973 megabytes per second and a write of 1910 megabytes per second, which is plenty fast for most people and use cases. Now you're going to probably go online and read that the 11800H has a TDP normally of about, 45 watts. Yeah, 45 watts, come on, that's peasant 3, and Illegear knows this too, and that's why the 11800H in this machine runs at an absolute maximum of 165 watts and a sustained wattage of up to 80 watts. Okay, fine. In reality though, it only hits a maximum of about 80 for a short while before settling to about 77, 78, which is still pretty high for an 11800H. Running at those wattages allowed the CPU to clock higher for longer and managed to score a pretty beastly 4651 in Cinebench R20 multi-core, and in Cinebench R23 it scored 12186. Blender's BMW benchmark wasn't much for the 11800H to handle, as it handily completed it in just 3 minutes and 21 seconds, so we move on to the Cinebench 10-minute throttle test, and yes, while the CPU did thermal throttle with the temperatures hitting the mid-90s, it really wasn't that far off from the PL1 and PL2 limits of 80 watts, as it was the 78 watts that I mentioned earlier, consistently with an all-core clock of about 3.8 GHz. It's the first time that I'm taking a look at the RTX 3050, so I had no idea what to expect during the gaming benchmarks, but one thing was perfectly clear. In all of the games that I tested, the paltry 4GB of VRAM really stopped me from turning the textures and details up to ultra, so I had to run some games at lower settings to work within the VRAM budget, and this starts with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Under the 1080p medium preset, I got an average FPS of 65 with a 1% low of 51 and a 0.1% low of 45. During that time, the CPU definitely got a bit toasty at times, hitting a maximum of 81 Celsius, while the GPU was a much more reasonable 67 Celsius. Due to insufficient VRAM, the max that I could go with Horizon Zero Dawn was the original preset in 1080p, and under this setting it scored a average FPS of 79 with a 1% low of 57 and a 0.1% low of 45, with the GPU hitting a maximum of 67 Celsius and the CPU at 78. Shadow of the Tomb Raider saw the CPU get quite toasty, however, with a maximum of 88 Celsius and the GPU at a maximum of 70. This was under the 1080p high preset, and it scored an average FPS of 73, a 1% low of 55 and a 0.1% low of 32. Finally, in a more esports-ish title, Rainbow Six Siege, the 144Hz panel was finally able to be put to good use, even with the settings turned up to Ultra at 100% render scaling. It scored an average of 161 FPS, a 1% low of 135, and a 0.1% low of 124, which is a perfectly good gaming experience, all while not getting too toasty, with a maximum of 75 on the CPU and 67 on the GPU. The 11800H is already one of the faster 11800Hs that you're going to be finding in any mobile laptops, but you're still probably going to want to use either Intel's QuickSync or Nvidia's NVENC, as export times for both those in my Resolve benchmark was considerably faster, though if you ask me, I would go for Nvidia's encoder, as under the same bitrate, I noticed better video quality using NVENC. The cooling system did very well at keeping the machine cool during my benchmark runs, as during the gaming workload, the vast area only reached a maximum of like 39 Celsius. Even while gaming, the noise levels were surprisingly not too bad. It's nothing like a jet engine tier, but more like an audible air conditioner. The speakers were also not too bad for a laptop, that is. You're not gonna get any bass, but the trebles and soundstage, aka sound wideness, sounded pretty decent.
Oh, that's a lot of berries. You're quite the gatherer, aren't you, little lost? Now go and see if you can find some more.
Look, it's a gaming laptop, and once again, I'm going to have to say that you have to temper your expectations when it comes to battery life. Under my workload of typing this review on it and listening to some Armin van Buren and Andrew Royale on YouTube, I managed to get only about 2 hours and 45 minutes of battery life on this laptop. Charging it back up took about 1 hour and 40 minutes. Closing thoughts, and as usual, let's start with the pricing, because I don't think that the configuration that I received was a very logical or normal configuration. Pairing the 11800H and the 3050 with 32GB of RAM is a very awkward combo in my opinion that pushes the pricing way too high to about 5,600 ringgit. Imho, I would bring the RAM down to about 16GB, then decide whether I want to pay 100 ringgit extra to get the 11800H and the RTX 3050 Ti combo, or step the 11800H down to an 11400H instead. Either combination with 16GB of RAM puts the laptop well below 5,000 ringgit, and I feel that these are more sensible hardware pairings, as if you're just going to be gaming on this machine, an 11800H and 32GB isn't necessary. A 11400H and 16GB of memory will do just fine. Then comes the laptop itself. Honestly, performance-wise, it's okay, it's not bad. The build materials are a definite improvement over their usual cheaper models. The display is nice and crisp, and it does really well at keeping the 11800H and the RTX 3050 under control, but I just cannot get over the issues that I ran into with this laptop, in particular the out-of-the-box software issues and the amount of deck flex on the wrist rest area that ended up triggering the touchpad buttons, and the cherry on top for me was just the alignment of the display being slightly off-center, triggering my OCD. Again, I say that these may just be issues that I'm facing with this unit that I have, and that if you choose to get this laptop, it may be perfectly fine, in which case you may end up with a great mid-range gaming laptop, but there might be that off chance that you end up with the issues that I did. So I think the question you should ask yourself is if you're okay with this. If you are, then yeah, the Onyx V TGL is a great performer and a solid laptop overall. But if you aren't, then, well, honestly, there are quite a number of other laptops, even within Illegear's own lineup, that have impressed me more than this machine. So yeah, your mileage may vary. End of the review. I'll leave any links in the description if you're interested in knowing more about this laptop. As usual, like if you liked it, if you found it useful, share it. If you have something to say, comment down below. And if you like my video and you would like to see more, then subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified for any future videos. My name is Yang the Tech Rodent, and well, I guess not everything has to be a winner, and maybe neither does it have to be. I'll see you guys in the next video.